I remember the exact moment my son Michael stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as a liability. It was my 70th birthday, and he'd insisted on hosting a small gathering at his suburban McMansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. Small, meaning 50 people I barely knew, most of them his business associates and neighbors. The kind of people who wore loafers without socks and discussed hedge funds over imported beer. "It's to celebrate you, Dad," he'd said. But I knew better. Michael hadn't genuinely celebrated me since I paid his last college tuition bill 25 years ago. I was standing alone by the built-in pool that evening, nursing a whiskey and watching my grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, 12 and 14, tap away at their phones, completely uninterested in their grandfather's birthday. The cool September air carried the scent of chlorine and expensive cigars, and I felt profoundly out of place in the backyard of my own son. "Dad?" Michael's voice came from behind me, that familiar tone of barely concealed impatience. "There are people who want to meet you." I turned to face him. At 47, my son had grown into what most would consider a successful man. Executive at a financial firm, custom suits, perfect teeth thanks to the orthodontist I'd paid a small fortune to when he was 13. His wife Vanessa was equally polished, former beauty queen turned interior designer, perpetually smiling while saying nothing of substance. "I'm taking a moment," I said, lifting my glass. "Social batteries recharge slower at my age." Michael glanced around, making sure none of his important guests were within earshot. "Look, I invited the senior partner and his wife specifically to meet you. They're interested in vintage aviation. I told them about your stories." "Ah, my stories. The ones he used to beg me to tell when he was a boy, wide-eyed and dreaming. The ones he now trotted out as cocktail party fodder, usually prefaced with my old man claims or supposedly my father once." "I'll be there in a minute," I promised. His jaw tightened. "Dad, they're leaving soon. This could be important for my partnership track." Of course. My birthday party wasn't about me at all. It was another networking opportunity for Michael, with his aging father serving as an interesting conversation piece, the eccentric old pilot with colorful war stories and not much else to offer. "Fine," I sighed, draining my whiskey. "Lead the way." As we walked toward the house, Michael slowed his pace and lowered his voice. "By the way, I spoke with my financial advisor about your situation." "My situation?" I hadn't been aware I had a situation. "Your retirement funds, Dad. The pension from Eastern isn't going to be enough, especially with the medical expenses coming up." I stopped walking. "What medical expenses?" He had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "You're 70, Dad. They're inevitable. And with the way you've been managing your finances," he trailed off, shaking his head. "How exactly have I been managing my finances?" I asked, feeling a familiar heat rise in my chest. The same anger I'd felt when he'd criticized how I raised him as a single father after his mother died, how I'd chosen my career, how I'd lived my life. "The flight school was a money pit," he said with the weariness of someone repeating an old argument. "That cabin in Maine needs constant repairs. You've got no investments to speak of. I'm just trying to help before it's too late." Before I could respond, Vanessa appeared with a couple in tow, the senior partner and his wife, no doubt. Michael immediately transformed, his face relaxing into his public smile. "There you are. Martin, Susan, this is my father, James Donovan. Dad, Martin is the senior partner I've told you so much about." I shook hands and played my part. I told watered-down versions of my more palatable adventures, flying relief supplies into disaster zones, navigating through a hurricane over the Gulf, the time I transported a heart for transplant and made it with minutes to spare. They made appropriate noises of amazement while Michael stood by, simultaneously proud of the entertainment value I provided and embarrassed by my worn blazer and unpolished shoes. After they left, Michael cornered me by the makeshift bar. "That went well," he said, signaling the bartender for another scotch. Martin was impressed. "Glad I could help your career," I replied, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. Michael sighed. "Dad, don't start. I'm trying to help you too, you know. I've been talking to some people about assisted living options." I nearly choked on my drink. "Assisted living. I live independently just fine." "For now," he said, "but that cabin is isolated, the stairs are steep, and you're not getting any younger. The flight school barely breaks even. It's time to be practical." "Practical," I repeated. "Like you?" "Yes, like me," he snapped, the veneer of the perfect host cracking slightly. "Someone has to think about the future. You certainly haven't. At the rate you're going, you'll leave nothing but debts for me to clean up. The words hung in the air between us, honest and ugly. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the boy I'd raised, but a stranger concerned primarily with balance sheets and appearances. Is that what I am to you now? A future debt? His expression softened, but only slightly. Of course not. You're my father. I love you. But love doesn't pay for round-the-clock care or mounting medical bills. I'm being realistic. I see. And I did, with perfect clarity. Well, thank you for the party. Michael, I think it's time for me to go. Dad, tell the grandkids I said goodbye. I doubt they'll notice I'm gone. I left without saying goodbye to anyone else. As I drove my 10-year-old Subaru back to the small hotel where I was staying, Michael's words echoed in my head. You'll leave nothing but debts. Maybe he was right. At 70, what did I have to show for my life? A struggling flight school in Connecticut, a cabin in Maine that needed a new roof, a pension that covered the basics and not much else. No wife. Catherine had been gone for 30 years now. One son who saw me as a financial liability. 2 grandchildren who barely knew me. But Michael had missed something important in his calculations. Something he'd forgotten or chosen to ignore. I still had one asset that wasn't on any balance sheet. One final card to play. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel and made a phone call I'd been putting off for years. Then I drove to Danbury Municipal Airport, where my flight school operated out of a modest hangar. My business partner and former co-pilot, Frank Rodriguez, was already there going through pre-flight checks with our only student of the day. James, he called out when he saw me. Thought you were spending the weekend with family. Change of plans, I said. Can we talk? Frank nodded and excused himself from the student. At 65, Frank was a compact, muscular man with salt and pepper hair and the relaxed confidence of someone who had faced death multiple times and walked away. We'd flown together for 20 years before starting the school, and he knew me better than anyone. Birthday party not go well? He asked as we walked toward our small office. About as expected, I replied. Michael thinks I'm financially irresponsible and headed for destitution. Frank snorted. That kid never did understand what really matters. No, I agreed, he didn't. But he made one thing very clear. He sees me as a future burden, and that's something I won't be. I told Frank about my morning phone call and what I planned to do next. His eyes widened. Then he broke into a broad grin. Hot damn, James, it's about time. You're not surprised? Hell no. I've been waiting years for you to pull the trigger on this. Catherine would have approved too, you know. The mention of my late wife brought a familiar ache, but also a certainty. Frank was right. Catherine had never believed in living cautiously. I'll need your help, I said. You've got it. When do we start? Right now, I replied. I've got a helicopter to catch. The Bell 407 touched down at a private airstrip outside Hartford, where Travis Keegan was waiting for me. Travis had been my student 20 years ago, a natural pilot who'd gone on to make a fortune in executive transport. Now he owned a fleet of helicopters and private jets that serviced the East Coast elite. Captain Donovan, he greeted me with a firm handshake. When you called, I couldn't believe it. You're finally cashing in that favor. Thanks for making the time, Travis, I said, and for the discretion. He led me toward a gleaming helicopter at the edge of the tarmac. For the man who kept me from washing out of flight school, I'd fly you to the moon if I could. Now you're sure about this? About. Greenwich isn't exactly helicopter-friendly. Lot of noise complaints from the rich folks. I'm counting on it, I replied with a smile that made Travis laugh. This is going to be good. Wish I could see their faces. He handed me a flight suit. She's all fueled up and ready to go. Latest avionics. Smooth as silk. You'll have no trouble with her. I changed into the flight suit, feeling a familiar surge of adrenaline. It had been 5 years since I'd piloted a helicopter, but some things you never forget, like riding a bicycle, only with more buttons and a greater chance of fiery death if you make a mistake. Travis walked me through the pre-flight checks, but his instruction was mostly ceremonial. Despite my age, my hands remembered what to do, my eyes scanning gauges and indicators with practiced efficiency. You've still got it, Captain, Travis said approvingly. Call me when you're done so I can arrange pickup. And James? Give 'em hell. I strapped in, put on the headset and began the startup sequence. The rotors whirred to life, the sound and vibration so achingly familiar it brought a lump to my throat. Catherine used to say she could tell my mood by how I handled the collective. Smooth and easy when I was happy. slightly jerky when stressed. Today my touch was perfect. I lifted off, feeling the helicopter respond to my commands like an extension of my body. Below me, Travis grew smaller, a hand raised in salute. I banked gently and set course for Greenwich, flying low enough to appreciate the Connecticut countryside, but high enough to comply with FAA regulations. The flight took less than 30 minutes. As the exclusive neighborhoods of Greenwich came into view, I checked the GPS coordinates Frank had texted me. Michael's house was in one of the most restrictive neighborhoods, where residents complained if delivery trucks arrived too early in the morning. Perfect. I spotted the property, 2 acres of manicured lawn, the swimming pool glinting in the afternoon sun, a circular driveway wrapped around a decorative fountain. No doubt the neighbors would be horrified by what I was about to do, which made it all the sweeter. I circled once, confirming there was adequate clearance in the backyard. Then I began my descent, watching as tiny figures emerged from the house. Michael first, then Vanessa and the kids. Their faces turned skyward, shielding their eyes against the sun. The downdraft from the rotors bent the carefully pruned ornamental trees and sent patio furniture skidding across the deck. I touched down with deliberate precision on the pristine lawn, mindful of the underground sprinkler system I was definitely damaging. I shut down the engine, the rotors gradually slowing as I removed my headset and unbuckled. Through the window, I could see Michael's face, a mask of shock, confusion, and unmistakable anger. Behind him, my grandchildren were jumping up and down with excitement, while Vanessa stood frozen, one hand pressed to her chest. I opened the door and stepped out onto my son's immaculate lawn, still wearing the flight suit. "Dad!" Michael shouted over the diminishing whine of the rotors. "What the hell are you doing?" I walked toward him calmly, enjoying the rare sight of my perfectly composed son, completely rattled. "I thought I'd drop in," I said. "We have some unfinished business to discuss." "Unfinished?" he sputtered, gesturing wildly at the helicopter. "You can't just land that thing in our backyard." "The neighbors, the homeowners association, do you have any idea?" "Grandpa, that was awesome," Tyler interrupted, running toward me with more animation than I'd seen from him in years. "Is that your helicopter? Can we go for a ride?" "Not now, Tyler," Michael snapped, then turned back to me. "Dad, you need to get that thing out of here immediately." "I'm serious, this is completely inappropriate." "Wow, Dad, lighten up," Emma said, phone in hand, already recording. "Grandpa is officially the coolest person in this family now." Vanessa had recovered enough to approach, her smile strained to the breaking point. "James, what a surprise. Would you like to come inside for a drink? While Michael arranges for whatever this is to be removed?" "Thank you, Vanessa, but no," I said pleasantly. "Michael and I can talk right here. Kids, why don't you go inside? Your father and I need a moment." Neither moved. Emma kept filming. "Now please," I said more firmly. And something in my tone, the voice of command I'd used for decades in cockpits, made them both reluctantly retreat, though Emma continued filming from the patio. Once they were out of earshot, Michael stepped closer, his voice low and intense. "Have you lost your mind? You could have killed someone." 50 years of flying without a single accident," I replied calmly. "I think I can manage a landing on a flat lawn." "That's not the point. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. And I did, because you and I need to have a conversation about respect, Michael, and about what exactly I'll be leaving behind when I die. His expression shifted, the anger giving way to something more cautious. "Is this about what I said at the party, Dad? I was just concerned—" "You were condescending," I corrected him. "You were dismissive of my life's work and my choices. You treated me like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. And you did it at a party supposedly held to celebrate me." Michael ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Okay, fine. Maybe I could have been more tactful, but that doesn't justify this." He gestured at the helicopter. "Where did you even get it?" "It's on loan from a former student," I said. "One of many successful pilots I've trained over the years. People who value what I have to offer beyond my potential to pay for my own funeral." He winced. "That's not fair." "Neither was 'you'll leave nothing but debts,'" I countered, "especially since it's not remotely true." That got his attention. "What do you mean?" I smiled. "Let's talk about what I'm really leaving behind, Michael. But first, you might want to advise your neighbors to stay indoors around this time tomorrow, because I'll be back with something bigger." True to my word, I returned the next day. Not in a helicopter this time, but in a restored 1940s DC-3, a twin-engine propeller aircraft that had once transported troops during World War II and later served as a passenger plane for commercial airlines. It was massive, beautiful, and entirely inappropriate for landing in a residential area, which is why I didn't land it in Michael's backyard. Even I wasn't that reckless. Instead, I arranged for Travis to fly me in his helicopter again, this time to a small airfield just outside Greenwich, where the DC-3 was waiting. Frank had coordinated everything, reaching out to our network of aviation enthusiasts who owned and maintained vintage aircraft. The plan was simple but effective: a scheduled flyover of Michael's neighborhood at precisely 2 p.m., low enough to be impressive, but high enough to be legal, followed by a touch and go at the nearest municipal airport, where Michael would be waiting, because despite his anger and confusion, my son was too curious not to show up. I knew my son. Beneath the veneer of the responsible financial executive was still the boy who had plastered his bedroom walls with pictures of airplanes and begged for stories of my flying adventures. That boy was buried deep, suppressed by decades of conformity and social climbing, but he wasn't completely gone. At least that's what I was betting on. The DC-3 was a joy to fly, responsive despite its size and age. The owner, a wealthy collector named Howard Barnes, sat beside me in the co-pilot seat, occasionally offering guidance but mostly letting me handle the controls. We had history. I'd helped him acquire several rare aircraft over the years and had consulted on restorations. "James, you old devil," Howard said as we approached Greenwich. "You're really going to buzz your son's house in my baby?" "Not buzz," I corrected. "Just a dignified flyover. Low enough to be identified. High enough to be legal." Howard chuckled. "And what exactly are you hoping to accomplish with this little air show?" "I'm reminding my son who I am," I replied, "and what I've built over the course of my life, things that don't appear on a balance sheet." We spotted Michael's neighborhood, the large colonial houses with their manicured lawns, looking like an architect's model from our altitude. I reduced speed and descended to about 1,000 feet, still well within regulations, but low enough that the distinctive silhouette of the DC-3 would be unmistakable to anyone looking up. Sure enough, as we passed over Michael's street, I could see people coming out of their houses, faces turned skyward. Through the binoculars Howard handed me, I spotted Michael in his driveway, hands on his hips, watching our approach. Beside him were Emma and Tyler, pointing excitedly. We made one pass, the powerful engines announcing our presence with their distinctive roar. Then, as planned, we banked and headed for the small municipal airport where the second phase of my demonstration was scheduled. Michael was already there when we landed, having driven the short distance from his house. He stood at the edge of the tarmac, arms crossed, as Howard and I taxied the massive aircraft to a stop nearby. I climbed down from the cockpit, removing my aviator sunglasses as I approached him. Behind me, Howard began a walk-around inspection of the plane, giving us privacy. "Another dramatic entrance," Michael said, his tone caught between irritation and reluctant admiration. "You do realize the HOA president called me personally to complain about the noise." "I'm heartbroken," I replied dryly. "Did your children enjoy the show?" Despite himself, Michael's lips twitched toward a smile. "Tyler recorded the whole thing. Emma's already posted it online. Apparently you're trending." "Imagine that." "Dad," Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What is this all about? Really? You've made your point. You can still fly, you still have connections in the aviation community. But why the theatrics?" "Because you needed to see it," I said simply. "Not hear about it, not have it explained to you on a financial statement. You needed to see what I've built over my lifetime. A collection of old planes. Relationships," I corrected him. "Trust, respect, the helicopter yesterday. Owned by a former student who's now worth millions. This DC-3 belongs to Howard Barnes, who's on the board of 3 Fortune 500 companies. The flight school you dismiss as barely breaking even has trained over 200 pilots now working everywhere from commercial airlines to medical evacuation to military operations." Michael's expression was shifting, the annoyance giving way to something more attentive. "When you said I would leave nothing but debts, you were looking at the wrong balance sheet," I continued. "You were measuring my worth the only way you know how, in dollars and cents, intangible assets that can be liquidated. But that's not the sum total of a life." "Michael," I gestured toward the DC-3. Howard is letting me fly his $1 million collector's item because 20 years ago I spent 3 months helping him restore his first vintage aircraft when he was just a hobbyist with a dream. Travis Keegan lent me his helicopter yesterday because I believed in him when his own family told him he'd never make it as a pilot. These aren't business transactions, Michael. They're investments of a different kind. Dad, I'm not finished, I said firmly. You've been so concerned about me becoming a financial burden that you failed to see what I've actually been building all these years. Yes, the flight school barely breaks even financially, but it's created a network of capable, grateful pilots across the country. The cabin in Maine that needs constant repairs. It's been the training ground where I've taught search and rescue techniques to dozens of wilderness pilots who have gone on to save countless lives. Michael was quiet now, really listening. You see an old man with dwindling resources, I said, my voice softening. I see a lifetime of meaningful work and relationships that are paying dividends you can't calculate on a spreadsheet. Why didn't you ever tell me this? He finally asked. I thought I had, I replied honestly. All those stories you used to love as a boy, all the people who would stop by the house or call from faraway places, that was me showing you what I was building. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing it. You started measuring success only in terms of financial security and social status. I watched my words sink in, saw the conflict play across his face, the executive who valued bottom lines warring with the boy who had once dreamed of flying. There's more, I said. Much more. But not here. Meet me tomorrow at the flight school. Bring the kids if they're interested. It's time you saw the full picture. Michael hesitated, then nodded. All right, but no more surprise landings in my neighborhood. The neighbors are already circulating a petition. I smiled. No promises. I've got a Chinook on standby. The look of alarm on his face was worth it, even though I was joking. Mostly. The Donovan Rodriguez Flight Academy occupied a modest hangar at Danbury Municipal Airport, with a small office space, a classroom, and a workshop for minor aircraft maintenance. Nothing fancy, just functional, efficient, and paid for. Michael had visited exactly twice in the 15 years since we'd opened it, both times briefly and with thinly veiled skepticism. Today would be different. Frank had spent the morning making calls and sending emails, and by the time Michael arrived with Emma and Tyler in tow, the parking lot was filling up with vehicles, everything from beat-up pickup trucks to high-end luxury cars. What's going on? Michael asked as they approached the hangar, where I was waiting with Frank. Some kind of event? You could say that, I replied. Just a few people who wanted to stop by. Tyler pointed to a sleek Gulfstream jet on the tarmac nearby. Whoa, is that the new G700? Those cost like $60 million. 65, actually, said a voice behind us. We turned to see Rajiv Mehta, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, approaching with his hand extended. Captain Donovan, honor to see you again, sir. I shook his hand warmly. Rajiv, thanks for coming on such short notice. How's the charter business? Expanding. Just opened our 3rd hub in Singapore. Rajiv turned to Michael. You must be James's son. Your father gave me my first job when no one else would take a chance on a pilot with an accent and a foreign name. Now I own the largest private jet charter service in the Northeast. Michael shook Rajiv's hand, looking slightly dazed. Nice to meet you. Before he could say more, the sound of another helicopter approaching drew our attention skyward. This one was painted in the distinctive colors of the State Police Air Support Unit. Right on time, Frank murmured beside me. The helicopter landed smoothly on our small helipad, and a uniformed officer climbed out, followed by a woman in civilian clothes carrying medical equipment. Captain Rodriguez, Captain Donovan, the officer called out as they approached. Lieutenant Maxwell reporting as requested, with Dr. Chen from Hartford Hospital. Frank stepped forward to greet them, while I watched Michael's growing confusion with quiet satisfaction. Dad, what is all this? He finally asked. Is all this? This, I said, gesturing to the growing crowd of people assembling outside our hangar, is my legacy. These are some of the people whose lives and careers have been shaped by what Frank and I built here. They've come to help me make a point. Over the next hour, Michael, Emma, and Tyler were introduced to a steady stream of pilots, medical professionals, business owners, and aviation specialists, all of whom had some connection to our flight school or to my previous career. Each had a story to tell. Sarah Chen, the emergency physician who had pioneered a helicopter-based organ transport system with my consultation, resulting in a 40% increase in successful transplants across New England. Marcus Williams, once a troubled teenager I'd mentored, now a decorated rescue pilot with the Coast Guard. The Blackhawk twins, not actually twins, just inseparable friends, who had taken their training from our school to start a successful agricultural aviation business in the Midwest, and dozens more, former students, colleagues, people whose lives had been touched directly or indirectly by the work I'd done over 5 decades in aviation. As we moved through the crowd, I watched Michael's expression transform from confusion to amazement to something approaching respect. Emma had abandoned her usual teenage aloofness and was eagerly interviewing several female pilots for what she described as my YouTube channel. Tyler was in heaven, collecting business cards and cockpit selfies with anyone who would permit it. Eventually, we made our way to the small classroom where Frank had set up refreshments. The crowd followed, turning the gathering into an impromptu reception. I had no idea, Michael said quietly, accepting a cup of coffee from Frank. All these people are just the ones who could make it on 24 hours' notice, Frank replied. Your father's network is considerably larger. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair approached us, leaning heavily on a cane. James Donovan, you old skydog, still causing trouble, I see. I grinned and embraced him carefully. Senator Harrison, didn't expect you to make the trip personally. For the man who pulled my idiotic son out of a crashed Cessna in the Adirondacks, I'd have crawled here. The senator turned to Michael. Your father saved my boy's life when every official search and rescue team had given up. Flew in conditions that would have grounded most pilots. Found the crash site when the emergency beacon had failed and performed first aid that the doctors said made the difference between life and death. Michael looked at me with new eyes. I never knew about that. There's a lot you don't know, I said without rancor, because you stopped asking and I stopped volunteering. Somewhere along the way we both just retreated to our separate corners. Senator Harrison excused himself to greet someone else, and Michael and I found ourselves relatively alone in a corner of the room. Why this elaborate demonstration, Dad? He asked. Why not just tell me about all this? Would you have really heard it? I countered. Or would you have nodded politely while mentally calculating how much the flight school could sell for, if liquidated? He had the grace to look embarrassed. I deserved that. Perhaps, I conceded. But that's not why I did this. I wanted you to see, really see, what a life's work looks like when it's not measured in dollars. All these people represent investments I made, of time, of knowledge, of faith, and the returns have been beyond calculation. Michael was quiet for a moment, watching the animated crowd. I think I understand now, and I owe you an apology for what I said at the party. It was short-sighted and cruel. Yes, it was, I agreed, but not entirely your fault. I've let distance grow between us, partly because I sensed your disapproval of my choices. It was easier to retreat than to constantly defend a way of life you clearly didn't value. I do value it, he said, surprising me. Or at least, I did. When I was a kid, you were my hero, Dad. The way other fathers talked about baseball stats or stock portfolios, my father talked about breaking through storm fronts and navigating by stars when instruments failed. I was so proud. What changed? I asked softly. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. Life, I guess. College, business school, climbing the corporate ladder. Somewhere along the way, I started measuring everything by its financial return. Success became about security, about accumulation. And I didn't fit that model of success. No, he admitted, you didn't. And instead of recognizing that there are different kinds of success, different kinds of legacy, I tried to force you into my framework, to fix your finances when they weren't actually broken. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe decades. I wanted to embrace him, but sensed he wasn't quite ready for that. Instead, I simply nodded my acknowledgement of his words. There's one more thing you should see, I said. Frank, can you hold down the fort here? Michael and I need to take a short drive. Frank gave me a knowing look. Take your time. We'll keep the party going. The drive to the small law office in downtown Danbury took about 15 minutes. Michael was quieter than usual, processing the morning's revelations. When we arrived, Harold Weinstein was waiting for us, a folder on his desk and a warm smile on his face. James, he greeted me, rising to shake my hand. And this must be Michael. Please, sit down. Harold has been my attorney for personal matters for nearly 30 years, I explained to Michael as we took our seats. Since well before your mother passed. Michael looked between us, confusion evident. I thought Bill Hodges handled your legal affairs. Bill handles the flight school, I clarified. Harold manages my personal estate, which is what I wanted to show you today. Harold opened the folder and removed several documents. With your permission, James? I nodded, and Harold turned to Michael. Mr. Donovan, I've prepared a summary of your father's current financial position and estate plan. With his authorization, I'm providing you with this information to correct certain misconceptions that may have arisen. Michael accepted the document Harold slid across the desk, his expression guarded. As he began to read, his eyes widened incrementally. I watched the progression of emotions across his face: surprise, confusion, disbelief. This can't be right, he finally said, looking up at me. These figures are accurate as of last month, Harold confirmed. Your father has been quite deliberate in his financial planning, though he maintains a rather unconventional approach to wealth management. Michael looked back at the document, shaking his head slightly. The flight school actually owns its property outright, and the hangar, and 5 aircraft. All paid for, I confirmed. The barely breaking even part is after Frank and I take our salaries and profit distributions. And this portfolio of aviation stocks started investing when I was 25, I said. Small amounts consistently, in companies I understood because I worked in the industry. Some failed. Many succeeded spectacularly. He turned another page. The cabin in Maine is sitting on 90 acres of waterfront property. Dad, that's worth... I'm aware of its value, I interrupted gently. I bought it for practically nothing in 1972 when that area was considered too remote to be desirable. Now it's exclusive lakefront acreage. The real estate developers leave messages weekly. And these life insurance policies... Your mother insisted, I said, feeling a familiar pang at her memory. She always was the practical one of us too. Made me get the first policy when you were born, then upgraded it several times as our circumstances improved. Michael finally set the document down, looking shell-shocked. According to this, you're worth over $8 million. Give or take, depending on the markets, Harold interjected, and that's not counting the intangible value of his business relationships and professional goodwill, which, as you've seen today, is substantial. Why didn't you tell me? Michael asked, his voice strained. Would it have changed how you saw me? I countered. Would it have made my career choices more respectable in your eyes if you knew they had produced financial success by conventional metrics? He had no immediate answer for that. I didn't build my life around accumulating wealth. Michael, I continued, the wealth came as a side effect of doing work I loved, building relationships I valued, and making careful choices along the way. But it was never the point. I think I'm beginning to understand that, he said slowly. Harold cleared his throat. There's one more document you should review. Michael, it pertains directly to you and your family. He passed over another paper. This one caused Michael's hands to tremble slightly as he read. A trust, he looked up at me, for Emma and Tyler's education. Fully funded already. Established when each of them was born, I confirmed. Enough to cover any college they choose, plus graduate school if they want it. Managed conservatively to ensure it grows ahead of inflation. But you never said anything. Even when Vanessa and I were discussing college savings strategies last Christmas, you sat there and said nothing. It wasn't my place to dictate how you raised your children or planned for their future, I said. The trust is a backup, not a replacement for your own efforts. And frankly, I wasn't sure you'd accept it without trying to control how it was structured. Michael flinched slightly at that, recognizing the truth in my words. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I told him. Just understand that when I spoke of legacy earlier today, I meant more than just professional connections. Family is part of that legacy too, the most important part, and I've been planning for all of it, in my own way, for longer than you realize. Harold excused himself to give us privacy, and Michael and I sat in silence for a few moments. I've misjudged you, he finally said. Badly and for a long time. We've misjudged each other, I corrected him. You saw an aging pilot with outdated skills and poor financial planning. I saw a son who had rejected everything I valued in favor of status and security. There's probably some truth in both views, Michael admitted. Probably, I agreed. But there's more to both of us than those caricatures, isn't there? He nodded slowly. So what happens now? That depends, I said. Are you still concerned I'll leave nothing but debts for you to clean up? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I think that concern has been thoroughly addressed by both the financial statement and the helicopter landing in my backyard. Good, I said, standing. Then I suggest we head back to the flight school. I believe your children are being thoroughly corrupted by my aviation colleagues, and Frank mentioned something about taking them up for a demonstration flight. Michael stood as well, hesitated, then stepped forward and embraced me awkwardly. I'm sorry, Dad, for what I said, for how I've been. I returned the hug, feeling a knot of tension I'd carried for years begin to loosen. I know, son. Me too. When we returned to the flight school, the impromptu gathering had evolved into something of a celebration. Someone had ordered pizza, several aviation war stories were being dramatically reenacted, and Tyler was sitting in the cockpit of a training aircraft with Frank, learning about the controls. Emma spotted us first. Dad! Grandpa! You have to hear this. Captain Rodriguez says I can start flight lessons next summer if it's okay with you. He says I have natural aptitude because I aced the simulator. Michael looked at me, eyebrows raised. Natural aptitude? The Donovan genes, I said with a shrug. They tend to express themselves in unexpected ways. He watched his daughter's animated explanation of what she'd learned in the brief time we'd been gone, a thoughtful expression on his face. She hasn't been this excited about anything in years, not since she gave up ballet. Flying has that effect on the right people, I said. It gets in your blood. I remember, he said quietly. I looked at him sharply. You do? You took me up in that old Cessna when I was about Tyler's age, he said, his gaze distant with memory. Just the two of us. Mum was terrified, but you promised you'd bring me back safely. We flew along the coast at sunset, and you let me hold the yoke for a few minutes over the water. I remember, I said, surprised that he did. You were a natural. I wanted to be just like you, he admitted. For years, that's all I talked about, becoming a pilot like my dad. But then, life happened, I finished for him. Other influences, other pressures, college and career and family. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the value in what you did, he added. Started measuring everything by financial security and social status. It happens to a lot of people, I said without judgment. We get caught up in one way of valuing things and forget there are others. We watched as Tyler emerged from the cockpit, his face glowing with excitement as he ran toward Emma to share his experience. Would you take them up? Michael asked suddenly. Both of them. Like you did with me, not in a helicopter, he added quickly. Something more conventional. I'd be honored, I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. We have a perfectly good Cessna 172 in the hangar, very similar to the one I took you up in. I'd like to come too, he said, then looked uncertain. If that's okay. More than okay, I assured him. It's been too long since we flew together. An hour later, after the impromptu gathering had begun to disperse, the four of us, myself, Michael, Emma, and Tyler, took to the skies in the flight school's newest Cessna. The children were beside themselves with excitement, while Michael was quieter, perhaps lost in memories of similar flights from his childhood. I took us along the Connecticut coastline, just as I had done with Michael 35 years earlier. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, the water below us shimmering like hammered copper. It's so beautiful, Emma breathed, her phone forgotten for once as she pressed her face to the window. Everything looks different from up here. That's one of the gifts of flying, I told her. It changes your perspective. Problems that seem enormous on the ground look very small from 5,000 feet up. Grandpa, can I try flying it? Tyler asked eagerly. With your father's permission, I said, glancing at Michael. He hesitated only briefly before nodding. Go ahead. Your grandfather won't let anything happen to you. The simple statement contained a wealth of renewed trust that wasn't lost on me. I guided Tyler's hands on the yoke, helping him execute a gentle turn while explaining the basics of flight controls. His face was a study in concentration and joy. You're a natural just like your dad was, I told him. Dad flew planes too? Tyler asked, surprised. Michael cleared his throat. A little. A long time ago. Would you like to take the controls for a bit? I offered, catching Michael's eye. It's like riding a bicycle. You never really forget. There was a moment of hesitation, a flicker of the cautious financial executive warring with the boy who had once dreamed of following in his father's footsteps. Then something shifted in his expression, and he nodded. I'd like that, he said, if you think I still can. I know you can, I replied, and carefully transferred control of the aircraft to him. His hands were tentative at first, but muscle memory took over, and soon he was guiding the Cessna with growing confidence. I watched his face as the joy of flight, A joy he had buried for decades slowly resurfaced. "Just like old times," I said softly. He glanced at me, a genuine smile breaking through the carefully maintained facade he usually wore. "Better, actually, because now I understand what you were trying to show me all along." We flew for another 30 minutes, taking turns at the controls, pointing out landmarks below, sharing the experience in a way we hadn't done in far too long. When we finally returned to the airport and landed smoothly on the runway, I felt a sense of completion, of a circle being closed. As we taxied back to the hangar, Emma leaned forward from the back seat. "Grandpa, is it true you're a millionaire? Tyler overheard you and Dad talking." I chuckled. "On paper, perhaps, but the real wealth isn't in my bank accounts, Emma. It's in the life I've built, the relationships I've formed, and the legacy I'm leaving behind." "Like us?" Tyler asked. "Exactly like you," I confirmed. "Family is the most valuable asset of all." Michael caught my eye, understanding passing between us. "Your grandfather's right," he told his children, "and I think it's time we started appreciating that wealth more fully." As we climbed out of the aircraft, Frank approached with a camera. "How about a picture of the Donovan flying dynasty?" he suggested. We grouped together in front of the Cessna, myself, Michael, Emma, and Tyler, arms around each other, windblown and smiling in the golden late afternoon light. Frank snapped several photos, then handed me the camera to review them. The images captured something I hadn't seen in years, a genuine connection between generations, a shared experience that transcended our differences. In our faces, I could see the past, present, and future of our family, linked by something stronger than financial considerations or social expectations. "I'll want copies of these," Michael said, looking over my shoulder at the photos. "For your office?" I asked. He nodded. Time to remind myself of what really matters. As we walked back to the hangar together, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't fully recognized until it was gone. The distance between my son and me hadn't disappeared completely, but a bridge had been built, a connection re-established. All it had taken was a helicopter landing in his backyard, a vintage DC-3 flyover, an impromptu gathering of my professional network, and a family flight along the Connecticut coastline. "Dad," Michael said as we reached the hangar, "would you consider coming over for dinner this weekend? A real family dinner, not a networking event disguised as a birthday party. The kids would love it. And Vanessa, well, she's still recovering from the helicopter incident, but she'd welcome it too." "I'd like that," I said, "as long as you understand one thing." "What's that?" I smiled. "I might arrive by parachute. Keep the lawn clear, just in case." The look of momentary alarm on his face was priceless, giving way to laughter when he realized I was joking. Mostly joking, anyway. 6 months later, the changes in our family were remarkable. Michael had taken a step back from his relentless career climbing to spend more time with his family, and somewhat to his own surprise, to reconnect with the aviation world he had abandoned in his youth. He'd even started taking refresher flying lessons at the flight school on weekends, gradually rebuilding the skills he'd begun learning as a teenager. Emma had thrown herself into flight training with a passion that reminded me of myself at her age. She'd started with ground school during the school year and was eagerly awaiting summer when she could begin actual flight lessons. The purple highlights in her hair had given way to a more practical shortcut that wouldn't interfere with headsets, and her social media was now dominated by aviation content rather than the typical teenage fare. Tyler, still too young for formal flight training, had nevertheless become a fixture at the flight school, absorbing knowledge like a sponge and developing an encyclopedic understanding of aircraft. Frank had taken him under his wing, teaching him the basics of maintenance and pre-flight checks. Vanessa had been the most surprised by the transformation in her family. Initially horrified by my helicopter landing, she had gradually come to appreciate the positive changes it had sparked. The last time I visited their home, she had taken me aside to thank me. "I've never seen Michael this relaxed," she'd confided, "or the kids this engaged with anything. Whatever you did with that insane helicopter stunt, it worked." As for me, I found myself more integrated into their lives than I had been in decades. Weekly dinners, regular calls, shared experiences that went beyond obligatory holiday gatherings. Michael had even started talking about possibly buying a vacation property near my cabin in Maine, so our families could spend more time together during the summers. Today was a special milestone. I was officially turning over day-to-day operations of the flight school to Frank, stepping into a consultancy role that would allow me more time for personal projects and family. We were having a small ceremony at the hangar, followed by a celebration dinner at Michael and Vanessa's home. As I stood addressing the gathered staff, students, and family members, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us to this point. When I started flying more than 50 years ago, I told them, I had no idea where that path would lead. All I knew was that I loved being in the air, loved the freedom and perspective it gave me. That love turned into a career, and that career created connections, opportunities, and experiences I could never have anticipated. I glanced at Michael, standing proudly with his family. Along the way, I learned that true wealth isn't measured by bank balances or property values. It's measured by lives touched, knowledge shared, and relationships built. It's measured by the legacy you create, not just what you leave behind when you're gone, but what you build while you're here. Frank stepped forward to accept the symbolic keys to the flight school, embracing me warmly as cameras flashed. "Don't worry, old friend," he whispered. "I'll keep your desk ready. We all know retirement is just a word for you." He was right, of course. I had no intention of truly retiring. At 71, I still had too much energy, too many projects, too much life to live. But I was making space for new priorities, new ways of building my legacy. After the ceremony, as we gathered at Michael and Vanessa's home for dinner, I found myself sitting on their back porch, looking out at the spot where I had landed the helicopter that fateful day. The lawn had long since recovered, though I suspected the Homeowners Association was still recovering from the collective heart attack. Michael joined me, handing me a glass of the good scotch he now kept specially for my visits. "Penny for your thoughts, Dad?" I smiled, accepting the drink. "Just reflecting on how much can change in 6 months. All because you decided to make a dramatic point with a helicopter," he said, shaking his head with a mixture of amusement and lingering disbelief. "Sometimes dramatic gestures are necessary," I replied, "especially when words have failed." He sat beside me, looking out at the manicured yard where Tyler was showing Emma something on a drone they had built together, another aviation-adjacent hobby they had developed. "You know," Michael said thoughtfully, "when I said you'd leave nothing but debts, I wasn't just being cruel. I was projecting my own fears." "What fears?" I asked. "That I was building the wrong kind of life," he admitted. "One that looked successful on paper but felt empty somehow. I'd devoted decades to accumulating wealth and status, but I wasn't sure what it all meant or what I was actually creating that would outlast me." I nodded, understanding. "And now?" He gestured toward his children. "Now I'm starting to see that legacy isn't just financial security. It's values, experiences, connections. It's showing your children what really matters, and not just telling them." "That's exactly it," I agreed. "Though the financial security doesn't hurt," I added with a wink. Michael laughed. "No, it doesn't. But it's not the whole story. You taught me that, rather dramatically, I might add." Vanessa called us in for dinner, and we joined the rest of the family around the dining table. It was a lively meal, full of aviation talk and future plans. Emma was describing her plans to eventually become a medical evacuation pilot. Tyler was debating the merits of different flight simulators with Frank, who had become something of an honorary grandfather to both children. As I looked around at these people, my family, both biological and chosen, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction, not because everything was perfect or all wounds were completely healed, but because we were moving in the right direction, building connections, creating a legacy together. Michael caught my eye across the table and raised his glass slightly in a private toast. I returned the gesture, our understanding wordless but complete. 6 months ago, he had seen me as a potential financial liability, someone who would leave nothing but debts. Now he understood what I had been building all along, a different kind of wealth, a different kind of legacy, one that couldn't be calculated on spreadsheets or measured in dollar signs, but was nonetheless real and valuable, and worth every bit of the dramatic helicopter landing it had taken to demonstrate it. After dinner, as the evening wound down, I found myself again on the back porch with Michael. The others had moved to the living room for dessert and coffee, but he had asked me to step outside for a moment. "I have something for you," he said, handing me a small box. Inside was a key and a photograph of a sleek Cirrus SR-22, one of the most advanced single-engine aircraft on the market, equipped with the latest avionics and safety features, including a full-plane parachute system. "What's this?" I asked, though I had a suspicion. "Your retirement gift," Michael said. or rather your transition to consulting gift. The down payment's been made. It'll be delivered to the flight school next month." I was momentarily speechless. The aircraft represented a significant investment, at least $600,000 for a new model with full options. "Michael, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," he interrupted firmly. "It's not just from me, it's from all of us, Vanessa, the kids, even Frank and some of your former students who wanted to contribute. We've set up a shared ownership arrangement through the flight school, so it can be used for advanced training when you're not flying it." I turned the key over in my hand, deeply moved by the gesture and what it represented, not just the aircraft itself, but the recognition and respect for the life I had built. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing he would understand all that those 2 words contained. "You're welcome," he replied. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" He grinned. "No more surprise landings in my backyard. The new plane stays at the airport where it belongs." I laughed, pocketing the key. "I make no promises. Some dramatic gestures are still necessary from time to time. Keeps life interesting." Michael groaned, but he was smiling. That's what I was afraid of. As we rejoined the others inside, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment, from a bitter confrontation at a birthday party to a renewed family bond, from "you'll leave nothing but debts" to a shared understanding of what true wealth and legacy really meant. Sometimes it takes a dramatic gesture, like landing a helicopter in your son's backyard, to break through the barriers we build around ourselves, to remind us of what really matters, to help us see beyond balance sheets and bank accounts to the real wealth we create in our relationships and our impact on others. That's the kind of legacy worth building and worth celebrating, even if it occasionally requires a borrowed helicopter and a very surprised homeowners association. The next morning, as I prepared to drive back to my cabin in Maine for a few weeks of peaceful reflection before the summer flying season began in earnest, Emma and Tyler insisted on walking me to my car. "When will you be back, Grandpa?" Tyler asked, helping me load my suitcase into the trunk. 3 weeks, I told him, just in time for Emma's first official flight lesson. Emma beamed at the reminder. "I've been studying the manual every night. Captain Rodriguez says I'm already ahead of most beginners." "I'm not surprised," I said, giving her a one-armed hug. "You come from a family of natural pilots." Michael approached from the house, coffee mug in hand despite the early hour. "Drive safely, Dad. The weather report mentioned fog along the coast." "I've navigated worse," I assured him, "but I'll take it easy." He nodded, then surprised me with a genuine embrace. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it." "That's what fathers do," I replied simply. "We see the best in our children, even when they can't see it themselves." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the 3 figures standing in the driveway, my son and grandchildren, waving goodbye with the promise of welcome when I returned. The image brought a warmth to my chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun breaking through the clouds. 6 months ago, Michael had seen me as a financial liability, a burden, someone who would leave nothing but debts. Now he understood what I had known all along, that the true measure of a life well lived isn't found in bank statements or investment portfolios, but in the connections we forge, the knowledge we share, and the love we give freely without expectation of return. That was the legacy I was building, not through dramatic helicopter landings, though those certainly made for good stories, but through every flight lesson taught, every hand extended in help, every principle demonstrated rather than merely preached. And now, finally, my son was beginning to build that kind of legacy too, for himself, for his children, for the generations to come. That was worth more than all the helicopters in the world, though I still wasn't ruling out another dramatic landing, just to keep things interesting. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.